Hi, I'm George Maestri, and today we're going to do upholstery in SketchUp, and specifically, we're going to do a tuck and roll effect that looks something like this. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, what I've done is I've already drawn my basic bench and a pad for on top of that bench, but we want to add a tuck and roll on top of the pad. Now, in this, I've actually put in some dimensions so that we understand how big this is. And as you can see, it's 73 inches in one direction, 28 in the other. Now, the reason I drew this is because it basically gives me a ½ inch border from 27 by 72. And that allows me to create my effect 9 inches at a time. So if I have 9-inch squares, I can do 3 squares this way and 8 squares this way to create the tuck and roll effect. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and create my panel. Now, as I said before, it's going to be based on a 9-inch pattern. So I'm going to start with a rectangle tool, and we're going to draw out a 9 by 9-inch rectangle. And then I also need a button for in between the little tuck and roll panels. So I'm going to select my circle tool and pull out a 1-inch circle. Now you can make your buttons any size you want, but I'm going to make mine 1 inch. And then I'm going to pull that up, say 0.3 inches, just a little bit. And then select it, and let's go ahead and make it into a component by hitting G, and I'm going to call that button. Now my panel right now is flat, and that's really not what we want. We want it to be kind of puffy. So in order to do this, I need to create arcs along the edge. And I also need to create insets here for where the buttons are pulling that panel down. So I'm going to start off with some circles that are the same size as my button, and that will give me room to place my buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and snap to corner, drag this out, and then type in 1 to make it 1 inch. So again, I'm going to drag out a circle, type in 1, make sure it's 1 inch, and we're going to do that for all 4 corners. And once I have that, I need to go ahead and erase. So I'm going to get rid of this and this, and as you can see now, we've got a little kind of inset that is going to fit this button. So I'm going to do this to all of these corners. And now we've got this inset, which basically fits this button. And if I move this button over here, you can see how it's all kind of lining up. Now we need to turn this into a puffy object, and we're going to do that by drawing curves that are going to be contours for the Sandbox tool. So the first thing I want to do is kind of get rid of all the flat lines here. So I'm going to get rid of this straight line, this one, and this one using my eraser tool. And then we're going to draw some 2-point arcs. So I'm going to select my 2-point arc tool, and I'm going to snap to the end point of this circle, end point of that circle, and then I want to drag up in blue. So I'm going to hit my up arrow to constrain it. And then I need to decide how high this is going to be. Now I've decided it's going to be 0.5, but you can use whatever value you want. Now remember, this is going to be lower on the edges and higher in the middle. So you need to understand how high you want the loft of this to be, and then you want to make the edges lower than that. So let's do this again. I'm going to go endpoint to endpoint, hold down the up arrow to lock to blue, and then left click, and then type 0.5. So again, snap, snap, lock, and then left click, and then type in 0.5 to make it exactly the height that we want. Let's do that one more time. And there we go. So now you can see I'm starting to get a little bit of nice relief here. Now we still want it higher in the center, so I need to draw 2 more curves. So I'm going to go back to my 2-point arc, and this time I want to make sure that I get this at the very center of this here. So right there at the center, I'm going to go ahead and drag this over, make sure it's at the center of that. And again, lock to blue. And this time, this is my center point. So I'm going to type 1 inch. So now this is lofted up 1 inch above that. Now, if I wanted to, I could certainly make it more or less. And then we want to do the exact same thing on this side. Now I'm going to actually move this button out of the way. And then make sure that's at the center of this. You don't want it on either side. And again, at the center of this. And then we want to lock to blue. And if it's centered, it's not there. Okay, so let's try this one more time. Make sure it's centered there, and then when you get it centered, it should snap to the center of the other curve. And we do, and you see the bulge down there is 1 inch. So now this is all locked together. So you want this center here to intersect and it to be in the middle of each of these corner circles. So now that we have this, we can make our surface. So I'm going to select all of these curves, go into Draw, Sandbox from Contours. When I do that, it makes this very nice surface. Now the surface itself is a separate object. So if I were to move that, I can move it off of those contours and it would be a separate surface. Now for now, I'm going to leave this overlapping the contours just so it's easier to work with. We can see things a little bit better with these curves on here. And so I'm going to go ahead and select this and then make that into a component by hitting G. And we're going to call this panel. So now that we have the panel and we have the button, all I have to do is align this button to that panel. Looks pretty good. And then we're going to go ahead and move those up onto the pad. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. And I want to move this here. So select the button and the panel, move it, and snap it to that. And so I want to position this so that it's slightly in from the corner and equidistant on either side. And that looks just about right. Now we can adjust these afterwards, but I want to get it reasonably close. So now that I have this, I can now start to copy these panels. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my Move tool, select this far right corner here, and hold down the Control key. When I do, it makes a copy. Now I want to make sure that I snap to the endpoint so that I've got everything aligned. And when I do, I can then type *2, so times 2, and hit Enter. So now I've made 2 of them. Hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. So I'm going to go ahead and select my button. I'm going to move it, hold down the Control key. Now I know this is 9 inches, so I'm just going to type in 9 and hit Enter. So now I've got basically my pattern set up. So now select 3 panels and 2 buttons. Let's go ahead and select the Move tool, hold down the Control key, and again I want to select that bottom corner there. Click and drag and snap so that everything is lined up, and then type times, I believe the number is 7. And when we do, look what we get. Now, I only needed to do 6 buttons, but it's very easy just to select the excess ones and delete them. And then I'm going to go ahead and select these dimensions and delete it so we can see it. So as you can see now, we've got this kind of tuck and roll top. Now, obviously, we've got some stuff here at the corners, but we could certainly put an edge treatment along this. And if we don't want these edges, we can certainly double-click on one of the panel components and just shift select those and right-click, and we can either erase or hide. I'm going to go ahead and hide this. And then, as you can see, we've got something that looks pretty much like tuck and roll. So hopefully this gives you some insight into how to use Sandbox tools to create soft looking surfaces, as well as how to use the array functions in SketchUp.